Hi guys, in this video I'll go over the primitive data types in Java. Whenever we create a new variable, we have to specify the data type and an identifier, and then the semicolon to mark the end of the declaration statement. Now optionally, we can also assign a value to it. Now that means whenever we create a new variable, we have to specify the data type. Basically to specify what values that variable can store. The smallest data type is a Boolean. A Boolean stores values of truth, such as true, false, or yes or no. An example of a Boolean variable would be, for example, is Sunny equal true. So this can only store false or true. Those are the only two values that can be stored in a Boolean. And this is good to have some kind of flag in a program, or some values of truth. If I just have yes or no, such as is Sunny, I can just assign it to true or false. Now another very common data type is integer, int, and this stores whole numbers, and it can store positive and negative numbers. So for example, 1000 or 0, 134, and so on. So only whole numbers, but negative and positive. This one is a 32-bit integer. So if you want to know the smallest or the largest value, there's a constant for this. So let's say we want to store the smallest value. I can spell out integer with a capital I, and this gives me min value and max value. So if I take min value and then I output this, and then if I run this program, it will print out the smallest value that an integer can store. So this is it right here. Now, if I need something larger than this, or smaller, if you will, smaller or larger than what the 32-bit integer can represent, there is a long type. Long is basically twice the number of bits. And again, this one can be any negative number, it can be any positive number, so it's a 64-bit integer type. And if you want to know the smallest or largest number here, let's take again the smallest long, spell out long with a capital L, and then there are two constants, min and max. So I take min, and I output this to the console as well. Smallest long. And if I run this program, we can see the difference here. So this is quite smaller than this one. It has, and in terms of bits, it's much larger. It has many more bits to represent very small numbers, or on the opposite side, very large numbers. Now, if you're familiar with C++, there's no such thing as unsigned. There's only signed data types. So it's only int or long. We cannot do unsigned in or unsigned long. Now there's also a short data type, which is 16 bits, but it's very, very rarely used. Now that said, let's move on to another data type, char. The char stores characters. So for example, a letter, and I can initialize this to A. Now every character has to have single quotes to mark it as a character. This can really store any character. So we can store letters, any symbol, we can store numbers even, so for example 5. But note that a character 5 is very different than an integer 5. So 5 in terms of a character in single quotes is not the same as an integer 5. Now let's create a character here and call this 5 and initialize it to 5. So if I output this 5 and then I put a colon and I output the code of this one. So every integer is encoded with every character is encoded with an integer value. So let's run this, and then we get the character 5, and the encoding of this is actually 53. So we should never mix characters with integers. Integers are numbers that we can use for arithmetic operations. Characters are really just character. The integer value that represents a character has nothing to do with the face value of that character. Now, with all these, there are also floating point numbers. So float, for example. Float can represent a fractional value such as 1.5, for example. And this one, again, oh, I missed the f. So whenever we have float, we have to append the f to that number to mark it as a float. And this one is 32-bit again. If 32-bit is not sufficient, there's double. So double, 62 bits for if we need a lot more digits after the decimal point. So this is an example here. And this one, like I said, 64 bits. Now, in pretty much all the programs that you're going to be writing, or in the beginning when you start out with Java, integer and float are completely sufficient. And if you want to store whole numbers, you take an integer. If you want to store fractional numbers, you can use a float. But if you ever want to have something really, really precise, just be aware there's long and there's double as well. Now there's one more data type, which is string. A string, when I create it here, let's say S, stores essentially text, which is called string, and it's written in double quotes, and it can hold multiple characters. So with the double quotes here, we could also store a single character, such as A, or again, such as 5. Now, double quote, or a 5 in double quotes is different than a 5 in single quotes, and it's different than just the integer 5. What a string really is a sequence of characters. So this sequence here is HELLO. This one is a sequence of just A. This is a sequence of a single character, which is 5. So it's still a sequence. It's not a single character. It's a sequence that is one character long. And there's another difference to string and all the other primitive data types. You can see these ones. First of all, they are highlighted different in the IDE here, but they all start with a lowercase letter. String starts with an uppercase letter. The reason for this is that string is a class. And if we look carefully, if we do s dot, there are a lot of methods that this class provides that can operate on the string. So in the very beginning, when I talked about a basic Java program, I mentioned Java has classes. And so here we create actually an object, and an object has a state, which are the characters, and then the methods here that can operate on the state, on these characters. So this is a little bit different than the other ones. For the most part, you don't need the methods in the beginning, but if you ever want to know the number of characters, for example, you can do .length, and this gives you the length of the string, or in other words, the number of the characters in a string. All these other primitive data types, they don't have any methods. It's really just a primitive data type. This one is a class. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.